The impeachment trial is on for a second time in a year. This time on Poll Hub, the historic second impeachment trial of Donald Trump is on, and even Senate Republicans acknowledge the Democratic House managers have made a pretty strong case. Never before seen videos from inside the Capitol during the armed insurrection are harrowing reminders of just how close senators and House members came to coming face to face with the extremists. It may not change any votes for conviction, but what will Americans think? And then the pandemic, infections, hospitalizations, deaths, they're all falling, but from very, very high highs. The vaccine is out there, but the speed of inoculations is slow, and getting kids back in the classrooms has become important. One of the big things that Republicans and Democrats generally agree on. So where are we roughly 1 year into the worst global pandemic in over 100 years? We are checking in. A lot to talk about today, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
It's like Groundhog Day. About this time last year, we were talking about the impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Well, I mean, it's been so rare in American history that there have been impeachment trials, and here we are again.
Well, hopefully there's not going to be 6 more weeks of impeachment, however.
Well, I think that's another thing that Republicans, Democrats agree on, is they want this to be over with quickly, I think with very different results they're looking for. So the trial, I think what's been notable, at least to me about this, is that the House managers, Democratic House managers, in playing these videos that we've never seen before, have really made a case that, again, even Republican senators are acknowledging is a very strong case that there was an armed insurrection that was, at the very least, fomented by Donald Trump and some of his words and some of his actions over the period prior to the election and after the election. But there doesn't seem to be much belief that that's going to change the outcome. They're going to need 2/3 of the Senate to vote for conviction. It's never happened in U.S. history, and it doesn't seem likely to happen now, right?
Well, there's been a lot of polling on this. I think also, gosh, we all having our own reaction to what we've been watching. One of the things that I find just totally incredulous is that this is occurring at the scene of the crime, and the jury are the potential victims of what occurred. And aside from it being the capital of the United States and, a threat to democracy and all of those other things that we're concerned about, the whole thing is sort of like Donald Trump's last act of this first term, where, how could you put this all together and all those things and sort of make one more big splash on the exit? But Barb, have you had a chance to look at some of the data here? Because as Jay said, not a lot of traction from a lot of Republicans, which voters, and that probably means not a lot of mind-changing vote changes from Republican senators.
Well, I think one of the things that's pretty interesting here, and we've had a number of polls over the past week, not necessarily over the last couple of days when we've had the broadcast of and the coverage of the current trial. But I think what we've seen in American public opinion is pretty much what we are seeing in Congress, which is people lining up according to the political party that they identify with. We've had polls from CBS News. That's an online poll that they do with YouGov. The Quinnipiac poll, I now need to refrain from calling it the Q poll, because that could mean something completely different.
Talk about a branding problem.
ABC News, and Ipsos, Gallup, the AP, and the NORC poll, and all showing pretty much very similar things. A majority of Americans do support convicting Trump and having the Senate do that. But what's different among these, so in CBS poll, it's 56%, Q, it's 50, ABC, it's 56, Gallup, it's 52, NORC, it's 47, and I'm going to pause on that just in terms of some of the methodologies here. But I think what's very interesting is that when you look at these polls, the only thing that's really different is the proportion of Democrats and Republicans who are in the poll. If you kind of control for all of that, it's pretty even. Right now in the country, there are more people who say that they identify with Democrats than they do with Republicans. But those who identify with those parties, really identify with the senators who are representing them, in Congress. I think one of the things that was interesting in the CBS poll too is that they asked a question about whether if this was among Republicans, and if those in the party vote to impeach or convict Trump, are they disloyal? And 71% of Republicans said yes. 29% said that those senators are principled and not disloyal to the Republican Party. So this is certainly an issue that is being watched and seen and interpreted through those partisan lenses. And I think that people who are somewhat dissatisfied with one party or the other, and particularly, are concerned are concerned both about what happened at the Capitol, but have been Republican. They now consider themselves independents. And so what you're seeing here is a Republican Party that is struggling, not just in Congress, but among the public. And those who identify and want to support former President Trump are sticking by their party label, and those who are not are moving and considering themselves independents who may lean.
Although very interestingly, there is a gap that has developed between people who give a better mark to congressional Democrats than to congressional Republicans. So and that may be just reflecting kind of, who seems more on the right page in all this, but there's definitely a reaction.
I think it also has to do with the fact that more people identify as Democrats in the country right now than they do Republicans. And then the plurality of people identify as independents.
Yeah, but the gap has gotten pretty wide. And I think the Republican Party, a little bit of an identity crisis right now because, they wanted, they would like, some of these senators would like Donald Trump to vanish so that they can run for president in 2024. But and Mitch McConnell may not be looking forward to the midterm elections if Trump is still out there as a figure. But I don't know.
But also, I think it has to do, and Jay, you may want to weigh in because I think I just cut you off when you were going to say something. But it has to do with kind of a definition of conservatism and, a definition of what Republicans are right now, and whether it's a party that is the party of Donald Trump, or whether it's the party that believed in law and order, and I think has some difficulty looking at some of those video scenes of the Capitol Police being attacked and trying to take a stand and not being able to hold back the rioters.
We talked about this in the fall. We talked about in looking at our polls, we did an analysis of the number of people identifying as Republicans versus Democrats, and that number falling, staying steady for Democrats, but falling for Republicans, and increasing number of independents. So this has been going on for a while. And I think we talked about then, as we are now, the fact that again, people, when asked in a poll, we're not checking their registration. We're asking, how do you identify?
Correct.
And so when times are tough for a party, people tend to identify less with that party. And I think this is a clear indication this trend has been going on for a while, and it's a marked trend that there's dissatisfaction among people who may think of themselves as Republicans but don't want to say that. In our last poll, which was just 2 weeks ago, we were in the field, and we had a similar number with the impeachment: 50% looking for a conviction, 41% for an acquittal. But again, a huge partisan divide. 34% of the people in our poll said they were Democrats or identified as Democrats, and 28% as Republicans. That's a 6-point gap. And, 28%.
I'm sorry, wait a second. 37.
34.
Sorry.
28. 34-28 and 35 as independents. So the biggest party in America, in our poll, is self-identified are independents.
And has
And I
been.
think that speaks, and has been for a while. But I do think it speaks, this 6-point gap in party identification speaks to the fact that the Republican Party, when people want to identify the Republican Party, right now there are plenty of people who say they're Republicans who are really Trump supporters, and probably may have voted, many we know voted for Obama in 2016, and probably identified in those polls as Democrats or independents. So I think it's the thing that a lot of people that are looking at polls, I think, don't appreciate is that what we say are Republicans and Democrats and independents, that is what people say they are, not how they're registered.
Correct.
And it's
That's a
a
good point.
much better indication, I think, of where people want to vote and who they're supporting than when we look at simple registration statistics or
where
things
the
like
needle
that.
is slightly turning, going in a slightly different direction. They before we leave the impeachment, and I suspect we'll be talking about it in other contexts, what is the motivation for the Democratic House right now, the House managers, to if they think that they're probably not going to win this case, they certainly have put a lot of effort into making as good a presentation as they could from
Well, but very few Americans saw anything more, depending on the news channel they watched, saw little more than what they saw on the insurrection day, and then in the ensuing days, a couple of things. It's that video, which is gripping and harrowing, and again, even Senate Republicans are acknowledging, wow, this is very, very powerful. Most Americans have seen little or none of it, and if they watch OAN and or Newsmax or even Fox, at sometimes they still may not have seen very much. But that's who this is for. This is not for the senators, the Republican senators, to try and convince them. They're not going to be convinced. But this is the narrative, that if they can change the narrative in America, not among the people in our poll who say they're Trump loyalists and think the party of Republicanism is the party of Trump, but among the majority, which is everybody else, this is for them. And this is the long game, I think, in redefining the Republican Party as the party of Trump. If you stand with it, you're going to fall with
it. Well, and what's also occurring in this moment in our politics is that with the new president in Joe Biden, he's been asked how he is reacting to the impeachment. He said a few comments and doesn't want to talk about much more because he's got a much bigger fish to fry right now, and that is the COVID vaccine issue and related, as you said, in the open, schools and jobs and the economy and all those things that he says he needs to pay most of his attention to, and not the trial. Although I suspect he's keeping one eye on the TV anyway. But
well, as you pointed out, Jay, the numbers certainly are coming down. I mean, the number of deaths is still horrific, and those counts, continue. But it does seem to that we are past the holiday surge, as it has been referred to, and hopefully not going into a Super Bowl surge. But I think that what we have seen in polling is certainly there's a very large proportion of Americans who are anxious and waiting and trying to get the vaccine as they become eligible. But there is certainly a very significant chunk of Americans who either are taking a wait and see attitude, or who definitely don't want to take the vaccine going forward. That has changed a little bit. Almost 1 in 10 Americans have at least gotten one shot. So that is, movement certainly in a good direction. But a lot more has to happen in order for us to reach a point where we have, what in essence is herd immunity, not just based on people who have had the disease, but of people who have vaccinated. Is there something about the messaging, something that you see in the polls that a different message might be able to impact this?
well, you go ahead, Jay. I see you.
No.
Well, I was just going to comment on the fact that there is that issue of people taking the vaccine and how politicized this whole issue has become. And now we're hearing about pressure on cities and states to reopen because of the economic um, problems that COVID has caused. And I just hearken back to what Fauci said a long, long time ago. I think when Donald Trump was talking about Easter Sunday as everything was going to be back to normal last year. And Fauci said, you don't set the timetable for the virus, it sets it for you. And I think that we still have to hold that thought in terms of public opinion and in terms of government policy. That's all.
Yeah, we talked on an earlier show about when the polio vaccine came out years and decades ago, and people were reluctant to take it. This isn't a new thing. In fact, it's a tried and true thing in not only American politics, but around the world, where people are, if you ask them at the very beginning, when a vaccine just comes out, there's a significant percentage that say, no, we're not going to get it. And I think the reason that we're seeing that number go down is because as it becomes more available and as the stories are told, and as you hear about your neighbors getting it, or your aunts and uncles or mothers or fathers or whatever, you're more and the stories are, I'm fine, I've got the shot, it ached a little in my arm and I'm feeling better, and now I feel like my life can resume. People are more likely, I think, to take that. The fear of the unknown declines because it's not so unknown. So I think on the vaccine front, the challenge for Biden clearly is to get enough vaccines into arms quickly enough to catch up to public opinion. I think public opinion is ahead of the vaccine distribution in that regard. But this schools thing's really interesting to me, because this has been an ongoing battle in states. This has not been partisan. There have been Democratic states that have kept schools open. There have been Republican states that have closed schools and cities. And it seems to be kind of all over the map, but there does seem to be this kind of agreement, and there's a sense in some of the polling that people feel like we should get kids back in school, as quickly as possible and as safe. And I'm interested by that. I don't know why. Why is it schools? Is it just parents are fed up?
We're
the kids at
we're
home?
seeing, you said it wasn't partisan, but we are seeing a difference along gender lines as to who's been most hurt by the economy and the fall off because of the coronavirus. And it's women who have been most likely to have fallen out of the labor force. And that is connected to the schools, because if the schools are not open, someone's got to be home doing the households. And although either gender could do it, that sort of falls on the plate of women more than men. I think that's one thing that's had a real impact, and that's been along gender lines, and the women catching the short end of that.
Well, but see, I mean, education has really always been considered to be, a local issue. But I think, something that's really interesting, and CBS News did a piece on that with the following the school opening tracker, and just hear how different some of these numbers are. More than 70% of K through 12 kids in Alabama, North Dakota, Texas, and Utah have had the option of in-person teaching. 75% of all students in Maryland, Oregon, New Mexico, California, Washington, and Virginia have only had remote learning since the pandemic began. So we have this incredible inconsistency. And we know as educators that there's a lot of question about, full remote learning, the impact it has, particularly on the students in the younger grades, and the experiences that people, families, and children have been having across the country has just varied so much. What are some of the implications of this going forward?
Well, one of the things I think we're all going to be looking at, and when we think about this, I always like to think about what will research and analysis and data show us about what's happening right now that we're talking about in terms of public opinion. But there will be facts and data that will show and prove out what the impact of this has been in various states and various cities. So I'm really interested to see that. Unfortunately, we have to wait to see that. But it does seem to me that the recognition among people, even in states that have been very, very careful about going back to school, that the parents are and they supported it at the time, are ready to get the kids back in school. That New York City, which is again very, very liberal, Texas much more conservative, but New York City has kept schools open to a large degree for in-person teaching in the elementary schools, and moving now to middle schools. So I think that we don't know what we're going to know about this until the impacts are measured. And I think sadly, the impacts are going to be, we already know from other research that the impacts, as you mentioned, from remote learning are never really great. And so I think let's see what happens with the disparate impacts between states where there are disparate ways of education.
And also between those with the means and those without means, because remote learning assumes that you have some kind of vehicle to communicate this.
Oh, the devices, devices and access.
And I skipped over this when I was talking about women be losing heart from the job market, and it's also a lot of people of color have been the ones who have been disproportionately being affected by COVID in a serious way. So
yeah, I think that's one thing that Joe Biden in 2022, I know we always like to look ahead, but if we think that the economy and coronavirus and all the things he's dealing with now, I think that's going to be the thing that we are only now beginning to see as a huge issue. How do you catch up? How do you repair the damage that's been done? I think that's going to be a huge issue going into 2022.
All right, who wants to say that'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub?
I think you just did.
Okay, and who wants to say that it's a production of Marist College, the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York? Any takers?
You just did.
Okay, done with that part.
What about Mary Griffith? Oh, she's our executive producer. What about Casey Schaff? She's our production supervisor. Amelia Morrell. She does this whole thing. She wrote the whole rundown so we could do this stuff. And Marcello Bettman is going to try and make this sound good because he's our editor.
All right, Barb, what are you going to do now?
I know. I don't feel I can, follow up this entertaining act of the two of you. But I'm just going to give a shout out then to the Roper Center Archive, as we always like to do at Cornell University, because they also put all these numbers together for us on a regular basis. They even go back in time with survey questions over the decades. And certainly, if you have any questions of your own or comments, please reach out to us on social media. You know how to find us because we're on all the social media channels as at Marist Poll or Marist Poll in one way, shape, or form. And so if you like what you hear, please consider leaving a review. We not only like your comments and questions, but reviews will also help others find us. And while you're at it, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Nice chatting with you today. Hope you enjoyed the listen. Stay safe.